I'll give it a few more seconds and then we can start. All right, it's 6 and we do have a quorum of the committee, so I think I can call the meeting to order. So I call to order the policy committee meeting of February 22nd. Just a couple of things I thought, because obviously we've got the regular Board of Ed meeting after this and we want to leave a few minutes for everybody just to have a quick break beforehand. So I did try to put, because we've got a lot to go through, I thought maybe if we can put some time limits on some of these policies, I tried to do that, knowing that if we don't get through that topic, then we can table it for the next policy meeting, if that works with everybody. Because I do think, otherwise we may never get to the end. So, so if that's all right. I think the other thing is, just as a setup for this, is quite a few of these policies are legislative and mandated changes that came in through both the CABE audit and Shipman and Goodman's policy updates and stuff. So that's probably what you'll be seeing in this meeting as well as in our next few meetings. We're just trying to do a little bit of catch up there. And then we will also, over the next few meetings, try to look at that COVID policy packet that you guys might remember that we adopted, but that sunsets on June 30th. So we just want to make sure that if there were any changes to any of those underlying policies that we didn't make this year because they were in the COVID packet, that we get updated on those, as well as seeing, there's one, I think it's like the Green Clean program that we never had in the first place, but we probably want to adopt because it's a good thing and probably should have already had that in place. So, all right, with that being said, I think we can jump into the first policy, which is policy 1700. I don't know if you all saw, I actually sent the Shipman and Goodwin model policy around 2:30 today. And again, I apologize that I didn't see that before. But I thought that it was worth all of us having that one as a comparison. To me, that actual model policy felt a lot clearer in terms of its, right, in terms of the policy and definitions and stuff. So I thought it was worth sending, even though it was a much later time. So the big reason that this came before us, again, this is those legislative changes. So both CABE and Shipman and Goodwin said we needed to update our policy that we had in place. Obviously, the two policies are very different in terms of how they meet those legislative changes. The first one that was sent was literally a red line of our current policy with CABE's suggested changes to it, because our base policy had been CABE's. The Shipman one, as I said, is much, much different. So I don't know whether we want to actually talk about which model policy we want to look at and then make comments on that, or if we want to talk about each one. But I might suggest that we actually say, do we want to look at the CABE one, or is the Shipman one that we want to use as our model, and then make our questions from there?
Margaret, are we doing about 10 minutes per policy?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, actually, I thought this one, we could probably spend about 15 minutes on this one, because I think there's a little bit more substantive changes to it. Some of the other ones were pretty pro forma. And then I thought 5141.4 would be about 15 minutes as well. That's the reporting of child abuse.
Hey, Margaret.
Yeah.
In the Shipman one, the only thing that I did not like was number 4, the other exceptions.
Okay.
To me, that just, an exception that they can cross the school property to go hunting, just doesn't.
I agree.
I don't want to see that in any of our policies.
Yeah, I agree. Does everybody feel that if we were to use the Shipman one as our model policy, do you feel like that's a clearer one than the CABE version? I'm seeing a lot of, okay, good. Let's do that. So we can, the CABE one, we're out. Okay, good. So we're working off the same thing. And I agree that is it all of?
Yeah, it's both. Yeah. Yeah, because I don't understand why the school or the district would grant somebody written agreement.
Yeah.
I don't see any viable cause.
Yeah, the one thing that one might be one where we just have to double check with Shipman on, because in the CABE changes, it did talk about being able to enter into an agreement for public school security services with a firearm. So that was one point where actually the two policies were
similar. So that's what my interpretation of Shipman's was. It was referring back to CABE's in my mind, it was the parallel to CABES.
But then, yeah, but then you have it under here, under optional exception, number C on the next page 3,
Yeah.
talks about armed security officers, which would be
Right,
probably the
right,
next
right.
logical step that we would take.
Okay, I see, right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think what I'm hearing from the group, is there anybody who wouldn't want to remove 4 as long as we're able to do so legally? Everybody's in agreement that 4
Yeah.
is something, okay. All right. What Shipman said, part of the reason for, their big reason for this legislative change was actually 3, which was the peace officer exception. I think that one is part of the legislative changes that came through. That was a mandatory piece of this.
Right.
And again, I know you received this version late, so I don't know if people had a chance to actually dig into the details of it. If it's something that we felt that we wanted to table so that everybody could get more into details, or if they've at least if you have general questions, more like what Joe just asked, that we could find out more information from Shipman and Goodwin. If we want to, maybe that's the way to go about it, is if anybody has any big conceptual things that we'd want to follow up on first, and then know that we can table this for our next meeting to get more into the detail. Does that sound like a good approach? All right, so again, just on that, on the bigger scale, were there other things that, as you glanced at it, that you saw we might want to consider removing or asking more about? Okay. I know there were, Joe, you referenced 2 of the optional exceptions. I don't think that first optional exception is one that we would want to add in, right?
No, I put a note here. It still can cause, it still can raise alarms. I mean, look what happened at Branchville with the umbrella,
Oh my gosh, right. I forgot about the umbrella. Yeah.
So that's the last thing we need.
Yep. And I don't think, and that second one, that optional exception, like you said,
That's
I don't, pardon?
no, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was gonna say, there's nothing that we have now that allows, is there anything in terms of MOUs that would need to
No,
be-
not for that.
Not
No.
for that. That's what I thought. I just want to make sure. All right. So that's not one that we would want to put in at this point. This one, I looked at the consequences, and it does reference, the discipline policy, which we've got, so that's fine. Okay. Anything else on this one? We'll go back and ask Shipman about that number 4, the exceptions, and make sure that that's fine. Oh, go ahead, Ken.
One, I apologize for being late. We've had family difficulties and technical difficulties, so I apologize. Is it, what would something like a stun gun be, or a taser be covered in this policy?
I can ask. Yeah, you're right. It's not necessarily in the definitions. I think they took the definitions specifically from the general statutes, like word for word, but
Right.
we can ask that, where that would fall.
Because I wouldn't think we would want that unregulated on school property either.
Right, I would add that to A under definitions.
Exactly.
Because they do talk about billy clubs and blackjacks and
And switchblade.
switchblades, yeah.
Yeah. So, and metal knuckles. I mean, I would think that
That's more
taser would
50s.
probably be more damaging, harder to conceal, maybe.
Yeah,
Right. So yeah, again, I think they probably took that, they lifted that language exactly from the statute, but we can probably add to it in terms of some of those.
So the 2 were stun guns. What was the other one, Ken?
Taser. I'm not sure what the difference. I know one is just the little electric charge, but the other one does shoot out that whatever with the wires attached that does some serious damage potentially.
Okay, good add. Okay. So we can move on then to the next one. 1700, we'll come back to the committee with more information. All right.
Margaret, so we're just asking Shipman about the policy, the stun guns, taser, and what was the other question that we initially wanted to ask them right out of the gate?
It was section 4 that's called other exceptions.
Okay.
Can we remove those exceptions, or is that part of what the legislation requires us to have in there?
Right.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, moving on. Policy 2111, equal opportunity employment. This comes to us because CABE said that we needed to add the additional protected classes. So you notice there's not many changes that are suggested in here. I don't know if anybody from the administration wanted to talk about that, or if there were any board questions.
Yep, just know that those changes have been adopted, even though outside of policy, in practice. So we did have a OCR audit last year, and we're in compliance that our postings and every student handbook, whatever, references those additional protected classes.
Okay.
I had a quick question, Margaret.
Yeah.
I just wondered what the district, if the district does any additional sort of advertisement for sort of trying to recruit diverse populations other than the usual channels.
Yep, that's a great question, and that will be coming at a future point before the board as part of minority teacher recruitment plans and revisions that we'll need to do. So yes, that will be coming in the future.
And
Do you want to?
Sorry.
I'm just saying we do want to support that policy and the equity and the plan for that. So I appreciate that comment because it is necessary.
Okay, so does this, seeing as these changes are pretty, oh, go ahead, Tina. Were you raising your hand? Oh, okay.
No, I think Karen already answered that, so thank you. Just a quick question.
Yeah.
Karen, will we, I know whenever we talk about minorities, right, it's a broad term. Will whatever policy you bring forward define that somehow? Like, when we say a minority, it can mean anything and everything.
Yeah, I don't want to prematurely answer that, but that's a really good question. I do know that we will need to develop a task force that will, look at what our plan is for Ridgefield. So I'm sure that we put part of our questions that we bring before the board.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions? So it seems like this one, it's pretty straightforward. It seems like this one will be one that we can bring before the board at whenever there's room on the agenda to bring a policy forward for this, for the first read. Okay. Interestingly enough, 3324.1, which is the next one. Again, it was the same comment from CABE saying that we needed to update it for affirmative action. However, when I went and I looked at the CABE updated policy to our policy, as you can see, there wasn't much to redline. It was really just more in the references. But I think it feels like the protected classes that we just talked about in 2111 should actually be mirrored under the affirmative action section of 3324.1. I know I didn't put that in
Agreed.
the red line because it was as I was reading it after, I'm like, well, so I don't think CABE updated their model policy based on the comments that they asked us to update it on. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but doesn't make sense. Yes.
Yes. So what guess what I'm asking the group is, if we were to update the language in the affirmative action section, which is basically what they told us to do, but just didn't do themselves in the model policy, so that it has knowledge that such person, agency, or organization discriminates on the basis of race, add in gender, color,
We're taking
all
yeah.
those categories that were in 2111, so it matches the language.
Yep.
Does that make sense? I don't think that violates anything. I think it just makes it consistent and would seem to be consistent with what they're asking us to do. Okay. So if we were to make that change, that sounds like one that we could bring before the board as well. Great. All right. We got an efficient committee here. Good job. Okay. The next one. Okay, this is going to take, this might take a while. This one actually we first saw back in early November, so a few months ago. Again, this one came to us because there were a lot of legislative changes. I think our version was from 2011, so there were maybe a few rounds of changes. And I think at that point, Karen, you said that in practice we're up to date. It's just maybe our policy was not yet up to date. With some of those changes. I think we needed to add sexual assault. There was something about electronic reporting, training of employees, and then reporting requirements based on a person's status as a student rather than their actual age were some of the changes that we talked about last November. I don't know if someone from the administration wants to talk about this, or
I could just speak to what we had talked about last time, was that the sexual harassment training has occurred. So we are in compliance with that.
Great.
With respect to the reporting of child abuse and neglect, that training we're up to date with as well. I had a question really on this, on 5145.511, and I don't know who the question is geared towards, but I'm just curious why the reporting procedure only speaks to a written report as opposed to a verbal report when it comes to the adults. But then when it comes to the child or the student, they can do either.
That's a great question. I think that would be a question for Shipman. This is their model policy. 5145.511 is a Shipman policy, which I think we adopted, what, Karen, it was like in 2019. It was recently, September, I think.
So my question, the reason I guess it feels like it blocks somebody in a little bit to only producing a written report as opposed to a verbal report.
Yeah, yep.
Okay, so I'll follow up on that one.
Were there any other questions? I mean, again, there's a lot of changes on the 5141.4. Most of the changes on the 5145.51 are literally just changes to the reference over to the name of the prior one. So it's mostly not substantive on that one. It's morely pro forma, but the 5141.4 is the one where there's a lot of changes. And again, it sounds like it's to keep up with some legislative changes regarding electronic reports. Go ahead, Ken.
I had a question in the second paragraph of 51414.
Yep.
Why was the except in the case of sexual assault by a school employee, why was that carved out? It's possible I just missed why, but
Let me just
it's like, I guess that's supposed to be two separate paragraphs. A mandated reporter suspicion, but then furthermore, the board requires all personnel.
Oh. Because,
Ken, what's your actual question there?
Why was that carved out?
What part carved out?
Except in the case of sexual assault by a school employee.
Because I think, and I just haven't found it yet, but I think there's a separate spot where they talk about the case of a sexual assault by a school employee. So I think they're first talking.
Yeah, well, that's what but should it be so far away that we're having to look for it?
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, we do on bottom of 2.8, there's if the report of abuse, neglect, or sexual assault involves an employee of the district as the perpetrator. But that's, I don't know why it wouldn't just be included in the all personnel who know about a sexual assault by a school employee, they should also report it.
Right, so you're saying, can we move that language up to be closer to the exception clause so that it's clear and like you said, you don't.
Oh, I don't even know why, because the way the paragraphs read, except in the case of sexual assault, but then we say, or has been sexually abused by a school employee. And I know that's sort of a thin, it's a tenuous line, whether they've been assaulted or
Abused, right?
merely just abused. So I don't know why those distinctions are being made.
Good point. I don't know. This is a CABE policy, so we would have to follow up with CABE as to why they made that delineation, but we can do that.
Because if it's carved out for a reason, then I would expect like the very last sentence of that, or a sentence towards the end of that, say, in the case of sexual assault,
Right.
this is the procedure.
Yep, good point. Any other questions about?
So can just to clarify on that piece, are you suggesting if we remove that except in the case of sexual assault because it's down below in that next or the second to last sentence of that paragraph?
Well, one it says sexual assault, and the other says sexual abuse. And is there a distinction?
I'm looking at the second to
Oh,
last.
I'm sorry. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So it says the mandated reporting requirement regarding sexual assault of a student by a school employee applies based on the person's status as a student rather than his or her age. And I think that's why.
That's the carve out.
I think that's why they're trying to make the carve out there, because up above it's talking about the age of the student as opposed to the status.
Okay.
Right.
I don't know why the distinction, because if they're a student, it doesn't. So if you're 18, you can be sexually abused by an employee, and that's okay.
Just for the record, no.
No. I understand, but according to policy, that's why I mean, it turns my stomach that we have to be discussing this policy, and that this has to be a policy.
But I don't want to speak, but my understanding it's the reverse. So in the sake of an employee, it's your power and your position over the student versus whatever their age is. So even though it could be the legal age of consent, if you're an employee, it doesn't matter if they're of legal age or not. It is always, a sexual assault and illegal or abuse.
Well, abuse should be too. I'm just saying we're making we're having separate requirements for assault versus abuse. And yes, while one is marginally more heinous than the other, it is. Why would the reporting requirements be different?
Yeah, we'll follow up on that. I do know that one of CABE's comments was about the fact based on a person's status as opposed to their age. So what Karen.
But that would apply. But to my point is that would apply to both.
Yep.
I mean, if you've got that relationship, that student mentor or teacher relationship, then you that power dynamic exists in abuse and assault.
Yep, that's fair.
Probably more so, honestly, probably more so in abuse than assault, frankly.
Yep. Fair point. So again, from an administration standpoint, there's nothing in here from a policy standpoint that's not in line with anything that we currently do from a practice standpoint, or will prevent us from doing something that we currently do. Is it, just want to make sure that we're not putting a policy in place that wouldn't tie to what we do. Go ahead, Nora.
To Ken's point about the difference or not a difference,
Mhm.
should there be definitions of those in such a policy?
Yeah.
Yep.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
As horrible as that is, you're right.
Mhm. Yeah, that would certainly add clarity, but you're right, horrible. Okay. Any other questions, or it sounds like this one, we'll go back to CABE to ask, the two questions are, can we add definitions for clarification? Or at least find out why, maybe they didn't even mean to make a distinction, but find out why there was a distinction. And then, get more clarity on that paragraph that starts with, furthermore, the board requires all personnel who have, and just get clearer in terms of what that's saying and why there's carve-outs, and what that language means.
Margaret, is there not a shipment policy that so the reporting procedure is shipment, right?
Yep.
And then the 5141.4 is CABE. Is there not?
So I looked, I had the same, because I would, especially on something like this, I looked, I didn't see one. All I kept finding was the 5145.511 on the shipment site, because that's a new policy that they put in there. But let me do some more digging around, because like you, I feel like the two, it's better if the two are coming from the same model source, so that we know that when they tie together, they're tying together accurately.
Yeah, it's just cleaner.
Yep, I agree. I'll see what I can find on that.
And I'm also wondering if they did have one, just to go back to Nora's point about the definitions, if Shipman had definitions that lined up as
Mhm.
well.
Yep.
Not to suggest that they would be different necessarily, but
Yeah, I agree. Okay. Yeah, I was just actually, as we were talking about that, I was looking to see if the 5145.511, which is a shipment, if that had definitions. I don't see it in there, but again, I'll look. Ask that question. Okay.
So odd.
Obviously, this one will come back to the committee. Are there any other questions you want us to investigate or look at before? On both? And then on the 5145.511, just to recap, the question there were Susie's questions about why is it just a written report?
for the adults, it's
the
distinguished
adults.
differently for the student.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, it's neither here nor there, but the word may just seems a little optional in some way there, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good.
Especially with B, where it's a school official or an adult affiliated with the school community.
Yeah, great point.
Oh yeah, that was my other. Yeah, that's actually a good point on even 51414. We talk about school employees, but what if it's someone affiliated with the school, a contractor, someone coaching PD?
So I actually think that might be the distinction between B in 5145.511 and D in that same one because they speak of the school employee, and that word there is shall as opposed to may.
Right.
But I'm wondering if those adults that you're speaking about, Ken, a contractor somewhere else, is that affiliated with?
Affiliated, right.
Right, but they're not, but I didn't see them mentioned in 51414.
Right.
And that seems like that'd be an easy add, school employee or affiliated person.
Right.
Although, well, I'm not, because the way that I'm reading 5141.4 is it's talking specifically about mandated reporters.
Okay.
And,
Okay.
and that's why they outline all of them very specifically. To include, for example, we do have, many communities have behavior analysts, some of which can be
Sure.
our own employees and some of them could be outside, you know, or
Right.
consultants, let's just say. So the way that I'm reading this is they're talking about all school employees and they're identifying them very specifically.
Right.
And then it goes on to say either employed by the board or working in one of the district's
Or any other person.
or any other person in the performance of his or her duties
Okay.
that has the contact.
Okay.
But that, in my opinion, that would not cover. That would cover a contractor, yes, that's performing work directly with students, right?
Yeah, on behalf of, yeah.
On behalf of the district.
Yeah. But that would be who's required to report it. But, and again, this is getting into semantics, but it's a policy. But we're saying they're required to report a student who's been sexually assaulted by a school employee. Full stop. Not a school, or are these all now school employees?
No, the way that I'm interpreting this policy is that any person, those individuals are mandated reporters, whether or not the event happens with a school employee or anyone else for that matter.
Right. Okay.
Go ahead, Ken.
Okay. Well, I just like for example, the last sentence of that first paragraph, such individuals, et cetera, place an imminent risk of serious harm or sexually assaulted by a school employee or other person.
Yeah.
Why do they have to be just report?
They don't. That's odd. That's an by a school employee there is odd because it's mandated reporter by a school employee or anyone else for that matter.
Right. Exactly. Well, that's my point. Yeah.
I don't know why they have that distinguished there.
Yep, we'll ask that. I was looking to see if there was reference to that later on, but I don't see anything that clarifies why that would be.
Susie, I'm just wondering if that's just referenced in the general mandatory reporter obligation outside of this policy.
Maybe.
I still think the question's a good question because I'm not sure why it's separate, but.
Right. So this almost feels like this is a reporting of child, the way in which this is written, it feels as if, and it actually took Ken to point out that school employee part to make me reflect on this differently, but it almost feels like it's reporting of child abuse, neglect, and sexual assault by employees from, the reporting of an employee about another employee. That's the way in which I feel like this is written, at least in this first paragraph.
Yeah. And would this cover suspicions of abuse outside of school. Like, for example, a teacher notices that a student is withdrawn or is bruised or behavior has changed markedly over a term. Would this cover that, or is that somewhere else?
Well, so traditionally, Ken, that is our obligation. So that is our obligation by any
Of course.
any individual. But again, the way in which this is written, it feels like it's very tailored towards the school employee, but it would not be different. Our obligation is the same.
I would think so.
It definitely is. It's the same.
Yeah.
As a mandated reporter,
Yeah.
those are the procedures that I follow, whether I suspect that a school employee abused, or a stranger, or the mother, or the father, or anyone else.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of those questions I can ask as a follow-up is that mandatory reporting, that if this is meant to be so singularly focused as Susie just identified, where does that other piece, is there another policy that covers that other piece? That piece that I don't know. And if we don't have one, then can we make this policy broad enough to cover both instances where it's not just about employees, but it's about suspected abuse regardless of who does it?
And the 5145.511 is not written in that same way.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
But I think
it does cover all.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Dr. De Silva, that it, because they're from two different sources. So maybe if from the same source, that might make the question moot.
Yep.
Cool.
Good catch. Okay.
Yeah, it's not, there's something here in this, I don't want to belabor it, but 5141.4, I feel like there's conflicting messages within its own policy.
I agree.
And some of that could be, again, well, yeah, right. I was going to say, because we haven't updated it in many years, so maybe in terms of even our integration, but then again, the red line is the current CABE version, so forget my thought on that.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll follow up. The big things obviously here are, one, to find out if Shipman has a similar policy to what 5141.4 is trying to achieve. If we can go with a Shipman one, so it ties more closely to 5145.511, holistically, that might even just answer some of the, or help us with some of the finer questions that we had. If not, and if we do want to use the CABE version, then I can follow up with CABE on questions, about the abuse versus sexual assault. If there's another policy that covers the mandated reporting of either of those, if it's a non-school employee. Definitions for clarification. Am I missing anything? Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you all. There's a lot to go through on that one, so thank you.
And just to throw something else out there, does location matter? Does the geography, if it happens at a school employee's home, or if it happens off campus?
In terms of mandating reporting, no.
No, okay. Just wanted to make sure if we had to make the distinction that we made sure it was all encompassing. If it's already all encompassing, then
it already is, yes.
Good.
I mean, it might be a really ridiculous question because I'm kind of new to this, but does this cover, how abuse can take many forms, electronic abuse by
bullying?
Yeah, bullying and electronic abuse. And I don't even know if we have one, and I'm sorry, I should have taken a look before. Do we have something that covers emotional abuse? Because by and large, sometimes severe emotional abuse can lead to physical or sexual assault. It could, there's so many reasons for it. I'm just curious because.
So I can't speak to the first part, Tina. I need clarification on that about electronic abuse, what you mean by that. Do you mean like bullying?
Well, it could be bullying, or how it could be, I'm just going to use an adult making, there are children who make TikToks or sending inappropriate pictures to children. I mean,
Yeah.
it will be covered by this.
Every-
All of this is covered. Okay.
Anytime that you suspect abuse as a mandated reporter, it's not really up to us to decide whether or not it was actually abuse. That's up to DCF. But when we suspect abuse, we report. We err on allowing them to make the investigation, and we report.
So something like grooming, which I think might be what Tina was referring to, like the grooming of a teacher sending, text to a vulnerable student, even though they might seem to be encouraging and supportive, and if the ultimate goal is grooming them for future abuse, is that?
So we have policies regarding messaging and things like that as well. So there's multiple layers to what you just described, Ken.
Right. Okay.
But anytime that one would suspect abuse, we call.
Okay.
But there's multiple layers to that.
Oh yeah. Unfortunately.
Anything else before we wrap up?
Can we talk about something like no skateboards in the hallways or something? Just a little lighter, because between this and the firearms, I'm going to have a hard time sleeping tonight. It's just crazy.
As long as there's no crossbows, we're okay.
Right. Yeah, exactly. No crossbows. Okay.
All right, good. So it sounds like, again, policy 2111 and 3324.1 are ones that we can bring to the full board, again, whenever there's room on the agenda. And the others will come back to the committee after we've had a chance. That probably won't come back for the March 1st meeting because it's only a week away, and I don't know. Susie, we can talk about, I don't know if that gives enough time for the follow-up questions to be answered, but.
We can circle back. I just want to be sure that I'm clear on 5141.4.
Yeah.
I know what all the other questions are that I can reach out and communicate and try to get those answers. And just to be clear, for policy 3324.1, we do need to make some changes there, right?
Yep. Yep.
Before that one goes for a first read. Okay.
Yep.
So Margaret, you and I we can try to get as many questions answered before our next meeting as possible, but it's 4 days away, so school days.
All right. Anything else before we take a motion to adjourn? All righty. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I so move.
Ken? All right. Any second? Tina? All those in favor, please raise your hand. All right. We're adjourned at 6:43. Thank you.